Hi, it's Patrik Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com with another quick tip for families in intensive care. Today's tip is about 5 ways you need to position yourself if your loved one is in intensive care in an induced coma and is not waking up. So you might be wondering, why should I position myself if it's my loved one not waking up? Well, it's critical that you position yourself as an advocate for your critically ill loved one and that you know what you're talking about when you have a loved one in intensive care, because otherwise the intensive care team will play yo-yo with you, and because you don't know what you're up against, you don't know the right questions to ask. The biggest challenge for families in intensive care is that they don't know what they don't know what to look for, they don't know what questions to ask, they don't know their rights, and they don't know how to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care. So let's dive right into it. So 5 ways you need to position yourself when your loved one is not waking up after an induced coma in intensive care. So number 1, it can take a lot of time to wake up after an induced coma simply because of the nature of the critical illness, of the amounts of sedatives or opiates your loved one had in intensive care. It can simply take a long time. There's no hard and fast rules for someone to wake up after an induced coma. It's not as simple as, you switch off sedation and you switch off opiates now, and someone is awake within 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks, sometimes 3 months. No hard and fast rules. Number 2, so when patients after an induced coma wake up, as I said, can take a long time. Now, sometimes patients with a head or brain injury, traumatic brain injury, anoxic brain injury, they can take a long time to wake up after an induced coma. And sometimes, even for someone without a head or brain injury, it can take equally as long, and even though they don't have a head or brain injury. So don't get discouraged if it takes a long time. It just takes a long time. As long as other things are happening, such as physical therapy, and I'll come to that as a separate item, your loved one should be on their way to probably a slow recovery, but still a recovery. Next, number 3, it depends on what sedatives or opiates your loved one has been on. For example, have they been on benzodiazepines such as midazolam or Versed? They are long-acting sedatives. That's a long-acting sedative. Whereas if you take sedatives such as propofol, right? Propofol is short-acting. That means if you stop propofol, someone should wake up, but even that's not guaranteed. If someone is on midazolam or Versed for long periods of times, they may not wake up straight away because it's a long-acting sedative. Also, benzodiazepines such as midazolam or Versed, which is commonly used for an induced coma in intensive care or for sedation, is addictive in nature. So that means if they've been on maximum doses of midazolam or Versed, they're coming out of the induced coma, they might now be addicted to the substance, and they may need to be, they are A, go through withdrawal, and B, they need to be slowly weaned off the sedative. So that in and of itself can cause a delay of waking up. The same applies to fentanyl or morphine, which are opiates, pain relief. They can be addictive in nature too, and they knock people out too. So therefore, coming off the opiates such as fentanyl or morphine can take equally as long, because it makes people drowsy as well. Another issue here is that depending on your loved one's liver function, kidney function, that again, that may be an inhibitor for waking up after an induced coma, because medications are not getting metabolized as fast as they should do with a healthy liver or with a healthy kidney. Next, if your loved one is not waking up, make sure they're having a CT of the brain. Why should they have a CT of the brain? To rule out a neurological condition such as a stroke, seizures, any of that. Very important to rule out that there's nothing wrong with the brain, that the brain is healthy and intact, because that means if the brain doesn't show there's a stroke or any other neurological condition, that there's simply just a delay in waking up because of the critical condition, because of all the medications that have been given. Last but not least, I mentioned briefly physical therapy. So if your loved one is not waking up, it's critically important that they still get physical therapy and physiotherapy, so to stop the deconditioning, right? Deconditioning happens very fast in intensive care. It happens on day one. The longer you are in an induced coma, the longer you're not waking up. There's massive deconditioning, muscle wastage, and the recovery time takes longer. So therefore, if your loved one is not waking up, make sure there's physical therapy and physiotherapy happening. And as part of that, again, if they're not waking up, also find out whether a tracheostomy might be the next step, because if they're not waking up, they will still be on a ventilator. That is my quick tip for today. If you have a loved one in intensive care, go to intensivecarehotline.com. Call us on one of the numbers on the top of the website, or send us an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com. Also, have a look at our membership for families in intensive care at intensivecaresupport.org. If you need a medical record review for your loved one while they're in intensive care, click on the link below or contact us for a medical record review. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel for updates for families in intensive care. Click the notification bell and comment below what you want to see next or what questions and insights you have from this video. This is Patrik Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll talk to you in a few days.